Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the fourth and the final day of this conference, ITSA India 2020. I think it's been 3 very exciting days, and thanks to all the panelists and the speakers, and of course, all who have participated. So we start today's sessions and the day today with what should be a very exciting and a very interesting and a challenging plenary talk. And I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to introduce our speaker today. You've all seen his bio perhaps on the site, but it'll just be more appropriate for me to read it out a bit. So we have today our final plenary. Our speaker is Naveen Thayyil, who is an associate professor in law and STS, which is Science and Technology Studies at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at the Indian Institute of Technology in Delhi. STS is a field of studies that looks at science and technology from outside science and technology, using tools in history, philosophy, anthropology, and sociology. Now, Naveen is interested in studying the social institutions of technology and science and the exercise of power and authority in the production of knowledge in these realms. His focus on the production of knowledge in these realms in conjunction with the interlinked domains of politics, policy, and law has taken him to multiple sites, including environmental law and policy. He has a degree in law. He studied as a lawyer before he moved to STS. He has done work in public participation in governance and in knowledge production, ethics and governance of NEST, that is new and emerging science and technology, visioning and technology assessment, of course in citizen science, in responsible research and innovation, and the algorithmic turn in knowledge production. His publications include the 2014 monograph on European Union regulation of GMOs. The book was Biotechnology Regulation and GMOs, Law, Technology, and Public Contestations in Europe. Science and Social Movements as part of the Oxford Bibliographies in Political Science. And Constructing Global Data, Automated Techniques in Ecological Monitoring, Precaution, and Reification of Risk. This was in the Journal of Big Data and Society. And he was a co-author, and I had the fortune of working with him on this public report that was Citizen Science and Ecology in India, an initial mapping and analysis that was released by the DST Center for Policy Studies and Policy Research at IIT Delhi in early 2019. So it might just be safe to say that Naveen comes to this conference and to us from perhaps a very different perspective, if not expertise, from what perhaps we have been engaging with. And I think he'll bring insights and understandings which will be both very interesting and certainly very challenging. So thank you, Naveen, very much for agreeing to speak to us to this conference. And as you've seen, the title of his topic and his presentation is Bazookas, Mobile Apps and the Agora, Citizen Science and Prospects for a More Public Science. And I might just quickly add that Naveen requested me to request all the audience that if there are questions of clarification that some of us are not able to understand as he goes along, please don't hesitate to send in those questions. They will come to me and I will probably ask Naveen to explain. Of course, the larger points we will discuss after his talk is over. So thank you very much. And Naveen, the screen and the mic is all yours.
Good morning, all. Thanks, Pankaj. Thank you for this introduction to the generous word. And well, I must also thank the organizers for giving me the privilege to deliver this note to address a group of people interested and committed to contributing to ecological well-being and knowledge about the natural world around us. It's really a troubled world we live in, and I think most of us would agree. And it's my belief that the work that all of you do matter a lot, not just for the generations that will hopefully follow us in this planet, but also for today, the world that we live in, the world that we want to lead for our future. So now, if I were to deliver this note to a generally informed audience in generally the humanities and social sciences, or within regulatory communities and environmental law and policy academics like that, I would start with introducing the remarkable contributions that scores of citizen scientists and allied endeavors in India is doing across the world, not just in India, making, and the promise and potential it holds for our present and future. But it would be preposterous for me to do that with you to a gathering like yours. I've also learned considerably from listening to the number of extremely interesting talks in the last days, 3 days. Insights on how to initiate and run endeavors, fantastic keynotes that were delivered by scientifically trained and accomplished practitioners like Geeta, Karen, Naveen. I mean the more useful Naveen Nambudri, and all of whose works I've followed with great interest and admiration, and the dozens of talks and the two fantastic panels that I followed with great interest and curiosity. Well, these learning opportunities notwithstanding, it happens that I'm asked to share my thoughts on the broader issues of citizen science endeavors in India and at large. And as Pankaj already mentions, my position here, my location here is a little tense. I'm an outsider to this collectivity. Citizen scientist, neither am I a trained scientist, nor am I a citizen who is doing citizen science in any way. Though my own subjectivity is formed in a lot of ways shaped by science movements like the KSSP, the Kerala Shastra Shastra Science Federation. Growing up in 70s and 80s was exciting in terms of how popular science movements came, popular environmental movements like the Narmada, Dairy, Silent Valley, whatnot. So my own work approach towards knowledge making is shaped by a particular kind of popular community people science in that way, and hence, and also because of my own emphasis on in my work around social justice and regulation and impact assessments, and also broadly on technology. I believe in some ways my liminal outsider position is also a sympathetic outsider position. Yeah, so today what I want to do is I want to share some thoughts on the ideas and practices of citizen science, being having studied it for a small number of years from the outside, and also with these kinds of influences which I already mentioned. Now, I also in the morning I woke up and I realized that this having no techno-visual aid is really something which is going to be a problem in this post-COVID sort of a situation. And it's double jeopardy for me also because I'm engaging with an audience who uses visualization a lot. It's almost a central facet of the way you do your work. So it's really, I apologize for not having some kind of visual aids which would help. But this is the way I do. I mean, so to aid this difficulty, let me just, in the beginning itself, offer you a short schema of what I want to say today so that it will help me and you navigate our style of communication. And before I quickly recount the schema, if I can just add to what Pankaj said, I know that we come from different interconnected academic, epistemic worlds. And if at any point, if I'm not able to get through to you, and if there is something key, please send a line live to Pankaj. And then if there is something which makes following what I'm saying difficult, I would like to be interrupted. And I leave that to the moderator to see and ask me to clarify what I said. And I don't mind interrupting myself, going back to clarify what I said. But if I could just emphasize that this is only for genuine clarity and not for a discussion, which I hope we can have in greater detail after the talk. Discussion and disagreements is something which we need to have. But for clarity, if you want, I would welcome interruption. Yeah, thank you. So back to the schema. Today, broadly, what I want to argue is this, that there is a particular stream thought that welcomes proliferation of citizen science endeavors as having the potential to pave the way for a more public science. And I want to gather some concerns and questions to bring focus to a number of themes and thematics, which in my mind may aid in this possible journey of contemporary science to a more public science through the broad basing of citizen science endeavors. So that's what I'm trying to argue here today. And for that, I need to elaborate on a couple of moves for sure. First, I need to share with you what I mean by public science, why I invoke public science to a community of or a gathering of citizen science practitioners. And secondly, introduce this particular idea that infrastructures, particular kinds of infrastructures, will facilitate this possible movement from whatever the science is today to a more public science. There is obviously no absolute public and non-public science. But if we can think about citizen science as a route to making science more public, what would that be? And in the last 1/3 of my time, I would like to quickly look at what are the sort of infrastructures I have in mind. But what I have in mind does not really matter. It's a community of citizen scientists who would think about what sort of infrastructures would make this possible, this transition possible, if you think that is the transition which you would like. Okay. Now let me start. So my first point which I want to make is an emphasis I see among a lot of, in the literature, and also a lot of folks who initiate and run citizen science endeavors. The public report which Pankaj mentioned earlier, which is easily accessible. I hope Pankaj can put it in Slack or something if somebody wants to easily access it. This we took more than 15, 18 months to just get this short report together, and interviewing from across the country different remarkable folks behind particular citizen science endeavors in ecology in India. Yeah. So I could, when we asked one question about what are your normative positions, why do you think this is something which you want to do, what are the objectives of your endeavor, one family of terms which popped up very strongly was around this question of democratizing science. So if I can just quickly read out the number of interconnected words which kept popping up, which were this democratization of science, of course, breaking or blowing away of the scientist and the non-scientist barrier. Then we had something like this: scientists should not have a strong role or strong control or a strong claim over knowledge production. And some others say scientists need not have such a strong role in control claims. Flattening out systems, we heard that a couple of times for sure. And then once we heard the local people is probably what we mean. The local is best placed for monitoring. And paraphrase, of course. And then we've had the more familiar public participation in scientific research, public participation in conservation. Citizens can participate and don't get intimidated or lose interest. I remember that person who said it inside the IIC campus very clearly. Such an exciting afternoon we had that. Empower community, decentralization of power in an evening environment. So some articulated class issues for access, participation, divides between urban, rural, DIY, democratization of data collection. So you could see, by now I hope I give you a sense of a family, a network of terms around which the objectives, the motivations to initiate and run the citizen science was from folks who are doing fantastic work. And similarly, in the literature, many number of analysts have pointed out this motivation, and I just use some recent Kimura and Kinchi. He talks about, again, identifies democratization of science as a central virtue in citizen science. And if I quote them for a second, it goes something like, advocates of democratizing science suggest that citizen science help to build a more equal relationship between scientists and citizen scientists. These are their words. Yeah. So as you can see, as I put out this network of words which connects to each other in some familiar sense, you can see there's some amount of latitude. Oh, some would say there's a great amount of ambiguity in what can be conceptualized as democratization of science. Tomes have been written about this, and the diversions about the meaning of this umbrella term. And I don't want to go into it today. Apart from helping us spot two quick moves I make today. Okay, one is that this is a shallow justification for my focus on public science. So why do I want to insist on talking about public science today? It's because many practitioners and some analysts, of course, insist and emphasize that this is a motivation, and this is a motivation I completely agree and would support. So it's again something which I want to hold on to dearly. Second is to help us note that there are contestations about the meaning of democratization of science itself. So a form of so this is a little long-winded. Please be patient. So the form of democratization includes contestations about what entails democratization of science. Some would say it's democratization of data collection. Some would say no, empowerment has to include more than just data collection. To talk about a very crass and crude sort of difference, for instance. And this sort of difficulty and contestation helped me move towards an emphasis and attention on public science. Now, what is this term public science? And it's incumbent upon me to say a little more in that. Yeah, so maybe 4-5 minutes quickly. So now, and I also anticipate some disagreement on this term, surely, and I'm hoping that we can discuss that at the end of it. I'm using some ideas from the sociology and philosophy of sciences when I get into this small, quick introduction to this idea of public science. So in the last 2-3 days, somewhere in Slack, I encountered that this very curious place. Science is not democracy. And I'm still trying to grapple the sense in which the user had used it. I suspect she or he had used this to say that scientific inquiry need not go down to popular or even populist measures. Popular and populist are different. They are not, scientific investigations are not up to decision by a voting by a general public in an election, though elections can change the way science is done, as you can see, for sure. I don't need to say more than that. Yeah. And I can also see that when you start inspecting something like scientific standards are decided partly through scientific consensus, but also through votes by elected or delegated experts. But nevertheless, I can understand the feeling, the reason behind someone saying science is not democracy. And this kind of a picture of a science is fairly more than 100 years old now. And there's an influential figure behind this is the American sociologist of science called Robert Merton. The Mertonian norms still very influential within the scientific and in more popular spaces about science. So his theory of social structure of science depends on an ethos of science, and he famously identifies 4 norms as central to this ethos of science. And these norms I will not be able to explain very much, but let me just name the 4 famous. Of universalism, the idea that anybody should be able to commit to a conversation about science as long as they are a scientist. For Merton, it doesn't matter what ethnicity, what gender he or she comes from. Communism, not the political communism which we hear about, that there is knowledge making is for the commune, that's the whole human well-being. For human is what how Merton talks about it. So for the community, yeah, and the idea that science has to be disinterested as a norm, and the idea of organized skepticism. So now I cannot get too much into any of this for sure, but the Mertonian norms and 40, 50 years predating Merton, there is a Vienna school of positivism, epistemology. They have been very influential in getting a picture about science as a value-free enterprise. Yeah? This, despite famous scientists included, like someone like John Desmond Burnell, J.D. Burnell, I'm sure many of you would have heard as a physicist, pre- and post-war physicist who talks about social responsibility of science, would contest this kind of ideas of value-free science. However, it's only by the early 90s that this disinterested picture, this model of value-free science, gets very controversial, and various science studies scholars characterizes contemporary science by the 90s. Science is not value-free anymore. You have various terms in sociology of science, like post-academic science by someone like Zimen, who would say that science now for sure, if not earlier, it's now for sure is outside the ivory towers, the university, and into the labs of profit and whatnot. And others call contemporary sciences mode 2 or post-normal science, someone like Ravis and Fantovich. And I think this would be very relevant here. I mean, when you talk about Ravitz and Fantovich's idea of post-normal science, let me read out a short, quick paragraph. Normal science aims at, or at least claims to aim at, establishing the ultimate truth or the final resolution of a scientific puzzle. Post-normal science recognizes that as long as both scientific uncertainties and decision stakes are high, such an aim is in principle unachievable. Indeed, it can be misleading and create false expectations to act as if the role of scientists in such issues is just to get the facts right. Instead, they claim that, and they are very widely cited, I would say, post-normal science, which is what they claim as it is today, aims at common commitments to reflective approaches, where facts are uncertain, values in dispute, stakes high, and decisions urgent. Many of would recognize the rapid loss of biodiversity. I mean, loss is not the word, but wanton destruction of biodiversity species and their habitat is an apt circumstance or a ground to describe post-normal science. I hope so. So in that sense, I hope you would be open to ideas about values inhabiting science, populating science. A couple of days ago, Karin Cooper talked about environmentalism of the privileged and environmentalism of the marginalized being different. And this is not a new idea. By the 80s, environmental economics like Joan Martinez Earlier or the great Madhav Gadgil and his collaboration with the environmental historian Ram Guha before he got into his avatar of a public intellectual. You could see this idea of environmental of the poor, environmental of the South. So, the next step we would need to take then is to ask the question, is it only environmentalism of the privileged and environmentalism of the marginalized? Or can we also imagine an environmental sciences and ecological sciences of the marginalized and ecological sciences of the dominant or elite? Is it possible for us to imagine? That then becomes a challenge for us. I do not want to push that further, but I just want to throw it out there for a second. Yeah. So if then we talk about science as not being value-free, you could see many parts of the scientific enterprise in the last 150 years being the handmaiden of industrial extraction, of wanton destruction. Willy-nilly might not necessarily so. So there is this question of values populating science in particular. Now we have been lucky in India, for instance, we have had giants like Gadgil and Karan guiding particular sciences like ecological sciences in particular socially responsible ways. But that by now I would hope that the public purpose for science, those values which should drive science itself would already make science not value free. Yeah. So then the next task which we need for us to go through would be to see how from here to reach this idea of public science. Yeah, so one is public science is that science which which would be insisting on having a public debate about the values of science. It is surely includes that science which would seek to, as Karen herself said, open up or democratize in terms of public participating in the scientific endeavor, but not just doing science, but also setting the agenda, having a public conversation about the values that should populate this science. So that for me is public science. And why do I think then citizen science should be connected to that? Because in the literature, you would see that there would be remarkable claim that citizen science endeavors are changing, transforming science itself in fundamental ways. That's the claim, not from me. But you do see this claim coming out that in a way, citizen science will transform the way much of science is done today. That's the claim. And in the future, you would see a difference. I don't want to enter into a debate right now whether that would indeed happen and in what ways that would happen. Let us just assume that we take that seriously for a second and then to see what to do with that insight. Yeah? Pankaj, how much time do I have got now? Okay. I have.
Touching the half an hour mark, you have 10 minutes more. The last 10 minutes you want
to. 10 to 15 minutes. Thank you. All right. So, so now the next turn I have to take is something which, through the in informational studies and STS, it's called the infrastructural. Yeah. Hello.
The request for you to bring the mic closer.
Okay. Cool.
That so, a little bit of.
Yeah. So yeah. So this is the next. The next move I have to make is what's called the infrastructural turn in some literature. Yeah. So here, if we want to understand what are the ways in which a citizen science can transform science into a public science, then the question also arises: what are the infrastructures which are necessary to make this happen? And why do I insist on this word infrastructure? Now, if you look at a general understanding, a layperson's understanding of infrastructure, we usually refer to infrastructure to denote large systems essential for human activities such as road, bridges, rail tracks, water, and even the internet, for sure, in this section. So here, I'm using the term in such a way to also include interrelated technical, social, organizational, legal arrangements, and what are the web of arrangements which make particular human activities possible to start with, and in our case, about knowledge production. So how do we imagine infrastructures for knowledge production that are robust and democratic, which will make science, citizen science, let us start with citizens, which will make citizen science more public. That will citizen science which will make more democratic in the terms, in the way practitioners themselves want it to. Okay, so so what becomes part of an infrastructural norm and what's not, again, is subject to contestations. But the point be, if we want to move beyond individual citizen science endeavors, seeking to answer the specific individual endeavors which seek to answer specific questions that are framed by them or by the public. So if you want to move beyond just this collective, this aggregates of individual endeavors, and to think about a community of citizen science, a community of practitioners with some shared objectives and values. Surely divergences can coexist with such shared values. Such differences can coexist with shared. What then what are the infrastructures that would facilitate such a robust citizen science process? I think that question then becomes important generally and also to a gathering like today. I see a chat here. Can I just quickly look to see? Okay. Sorry. Yeah. To take so what is the sort of infrastructures which I'm thinking about? Uh, 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 we can talk about specific technologies for sure, data. So all sorts of data issues, data architectures, apps. But the question remains how to think about this. Why not call it just apps or technology, and why call it infrastructure? The importance, to my mind, of using the word infrastructure is to emphasize the interrelationships of different social community practices of various kinds, and that includes technological practice, user interfaces. So, to insist on a web of different technical and social practices coming together, the word infrastructure, to think about it as infrastructure, to build an infrastructure of knowledge production important, to my mind, makes more sense. But the question then still remains, what are the sets of infrastructures which makes such a move, such thinking possible? If I could quickly give to start with, what are the infrastructures which require us, which would help us? What are the infrastructures required to help us think about the divergences in the visions of citizen science endeavors across India? I'll come back to that in a second. Let me take something which is far more tangible and tractable for you in the immediate sense. Um, uh, One infrastructure which will straight away come to your mind would be apps, right? So let me just unpack the app for a minute or two. The data architectures of various kinds. We take apps as a central feature in the citizen science ecosystem, along with the user, of course. But taking into account how apps are infrastructurally situated by sniffing network connections and data traffic flows, detecting app package contents, revealing design patterns and principles, and identifying platform logics that ultimately form the broader conditions of possibility for infrastructures and supported practices. For instance, how different apps relate to one another and to other things, and not just to one another. The practices, systems, and structures which make apps relating to one another and to the user possible. For instance, app developers employ a variety of sanctioned and third-party data developer tools, such as APIs or software development kits and integrated developmental environments. Developer tools may be obligatory if one wants to access user data. The software-based functions of mobile operating systems might become important. Sensors and other functionalities integrated to mobile devices might become important. So with the notion of infrastructure comes the crucial question of scale. Knowledge infrastructures are often layered and dispersed rather than discrete identifiable objects, like a discrete app. They are layered, they are dispersed, and they are networked. And then the question to ask for us, to my mind, how does the community of citizen science, communities of community science activists, think about scale, the scale of impact they will and they can have, and how to leverage a multiplicity of apps into a network which already exists, but how to leverage that towards making infrastructures which will make your own shared values direct your citizens and endeavors towards those values. I suspect it might be a little abstracted, but I can come back to it in a second. But I want to move beyond technology and data, though in the last 2-3 days, I got some remarkable exchanges, and I cannot help take a minute or two. I have seen in various discussions focuses on data infrastructure beyond the apps.
Naveen,
Yeah.
can I suggest 5 minutes more? Then we have some time for discussion.
Sure. Thank you. So you have questions about open data, access, and questions about community of citizen science architecture to validate, curate, aggregate, as Prabhakar was talking about. And so there is a huge space already in the last 3 days where there have been conversations about apps, technology as architecture. So this is something not anything really new. But let me introduce two others quickly to wrap up in a particular way. How about having a visioning or a vision exercise? What are the metaphors which would drive a citizen science community ahead in the next decade or two? Yeah, I mean, how is it that that an infrastructure that is a statement of values, which helps you decide how to gear what infrastructures itself to make. So, an infrastructure to think about infrastructural goals for you. That's one. Okay, I can elaborate on that later if necessary. How about having an infrastructure to a forum to discuss and disagree about different values, different ways in which citizen science can be done? Yeah, this beyond already the technological and legal infrastructure that we can put. I want to give more time for discussion, so I want to wrap up in a quick while. So let me just quickly take one last minute to make my argument clear once more. Citizen science is often claimed to make science more democratic, more public in its articulation of values, in the way science is done, giving more control and role for known scientific people. You would, even in discussion, you would hear, is citizen science for science or is citizen science for citizens? This, I could hear that in the last 2-3 days, very sharply. And I would add, is citizen science for scientists? Yeah? So there are conflicting visions about citizens. And there are also some amount of convergence, great amount of convergence that there is a value of democratizing. What are the architectures which would make this possible? It is not for me to suggest anything to my mind, though I can be part of a conversation in some way, but it is for a community of citizen scientists, to my mind, to think seriously about infrastructure as a way to think about how to broad-base citizen science endeavors in India and take it and transform science itself in a particular. Thank you for your patience and for having me here in this.
Thank you, Naveen. That was, I wouldn't hesitate to say that was absolutely fascinating, challenging, thoughtful, and provocative in its own way. I know when we discussed earlier, you said you don't want it to be provocative, but I think provocative in a very productive kind of way. So thank you so much. My sense is that we don't have any questions yet. I think people are still reflecting on this. If we can just wait for a minute or two to see if there are any thoughts or any questions, any people seeking clarifications. We have Amit and Akshata would help us get those questions in. We'll just wait for about 15-20 seconds, or then I will ask a couple of questions based on what struck me to start the conversations going. But I'm hoping that all of us who've joined will strike out and ask questions and even challenge Naveen to some of the things that he said. I'm sure he'll take up that challenge. So, yeah. You're mute, Naveen. Will you just...
As you start, I just wanted to take half a minute quickly so that you can also get it. So the different values which we talk about, specifically in biodiversity, ecological sciences in India. And I see in one of the talks, it came out very sharply, and I wanted to cite them without citing the person. The person would Definitely no. This is biodiversity in India is not just about distribution of species. And he says, and this is somebody who has been contributing for decades now to your endeavors. It's also about livelihoods, about landscape, so use of reasons for conservation and conflict. So you see the tension here in the sciences, and you see also the tension of thinking about, is citizen science a science is for the science, or is it for people or citizens? This tension keeps coming across, and instead of having us have 1,000 flowers of individual flowers bloom, how do we think about getting infrastructures to make robust practices possible in which different endeavors can interact with each other in more robust, popular, public, and scientific ways? That's the task I think we have. Thank you. That gives you, I hope, a moment to respond. Yeah.
There's one question already, Naveen. This is Nandini, who's one of also the organizers, and she teaches at ISER in Tirupati. So she says, you bring up interesting points about the name of this field or work, citizen science. If you were to observe this movement slash field of information and then come up with a name, what would it be?
Thank you, Nandini. Oh, am I mute again? Okay. So thank you, Nandini. That's a very interesting question. To start with, I see multiple strands within what you call citizen science now. So if you think about the interaction between science and the non-science, or when I say science and the non-science, what I mean to say is the scientific establishment and those who are outside the scientific establishment. I don't mean science in the normative way. So when production of knowledge is happening, there is a productive tension between these two spaces. And with the tension, what are the different models which you say which come? You see scientific change happening through internal discussions between scientists. That is one way to think about scientific change. The second way to think about scientific change is over and above the first, there are also brave scientists, radical scientists, or troublesome scientists who would have interactions with the outside of the scientific establishment. And in that interaction, more scientific knowledge can be produced. That is the second way of viewing things. The third would be when outsiders push scientists with certain agendas, making them work. And the fourth is the outside making agendas and also conducting it. You would see that in various examples, and there is enough literature. So there are 4 different models possible of looking at how scientific change happens. And these are not watertight, or these are not one excluding the other. Unless, of course, you take the first as the only way, that is a possibility. So within this 4, I see all of them in the last 15 years, which has happened. That is my first answer. Second answer is, what are the traditions which inform? And when it's a very curious term, citizen science, and this question also went to Thayyil the other day, that we have strong traditions from earlier. The people science movements in India, there's a very strong tradition which created infrastructures and organizations which made individuals, citizens, contribute in extremely productive ways. So it is not, in my sense, it is not mine to name, but I can see these kinds of different different influences coming together. To call it a citizen science or a community science depends on what your normative position is. But surely community science can also be thought of as part of a citizen science. I mean, I will just leave it there.
Thanks, Naveen. There's one more question from Nishant. So his question is, how are the change of values affecting the communication between scientists, public, and the nature enthusiast?
That's a very difficult question. It depends on what is the change of values we are talking about. When we talk about values, There are values about science, but values about other things. Yeah. So if you talk about values about science, a change of values that emphasizes on democratization of science of a particular way could compel or at least encourage many scientists to communicate science in a particular way to its outside. But it can also compel scientists to need to listen to what the non-scientist is saying. So the values which non-scientists would assert of sustainability would compel material scientists to think about their problems differently. If you look at history of chemistry, you see different chemistries emerging, from organic chemistry to green chemistry. Look at the organic movement, organic agriculture movement. That has changed the way agricultural science has been done. So in all this, communication of has changed from I will talk and you will listen to a two-way communication with different cues. I hope that sort of hints at what you want me to talk.
There's a question from Suhail. Like science itself, citizen science is surely plural in its motivations, methods, and outcomes. So it need not be either for science or for people. So it's not an either or situation. Different projects may answer this differently, and even within a project, there may be multiple motivations. Should we not be creating a big tent that can include the various flavors of efforts?
Thanks, Sohail. I completely agree with you on that. I mean, we all come with our normative positions, our objectives and motivations are different. And to be a public science necessarily means that we should have the space to disagree and work together. And what is an infrastructure which will be able to allow us to do that? That is the challenge. To my mind, what you point out is one of the most difficult tasks to do. I mean, it's definitely difficult to think about getting the technology right, but also to think about the visions, the contradictory visions which drive us, and what infrastructure will allow us to do that in a big tent way. And so I am fully with you on that.
I have a question, Naveen. I just want to go back to that discussion where you talked about mode 2 science and post-normal science and things like that. And what strikes me in the discussion, in your presentation today and other discussion, is that a lot of this terminology and this studies on knowledge are located in the Western academy. Yeah, so all the scholars that you quoted, for instance, are of Western science or located in the West geographically. And there is certainly a historical context to them talking of mode 2 and post-normal in a particular kind of way. Do you think, how does it, so there is a kind of a critique and a question saying that maybe it is not as applicable to the Indian context, although our science and technology aspirations and institutions are very much based on the West. But do we need a slightly different terminology or typology, and or have we bypassed some of these and we are not recognizing that? For example, in the public science movements already, maybe we had post-normal or mode 2 even before the West started to acknowledge that kind of trend. And what is the potential and the possibility of this going forward?
Fantastic. Thanks, Pankaj. I mean, I agree with you that that the terms should be ours, the infrastructure should be ours. Whatever this ours, I'm not into nationalist sense when I'm talking about ours. We have to work with our context. I'm fully with that. Second, it is to talk about Western is a little, as you also tried to say, it's a little problematic here because in a lot of ways, Western scientific institutions, in its values and its methodologies, are also impacting definitely in very significant way the way we have got our so the colonial nature of introduction of Western science in India, creating our educational institutions, the methodology. So I would skirt the question by saying that are the claims of a standard picture of science that there is a particular scientific method which is value free, do they exist in India? Do they do they have certain balance, certain purchase, strong purchase, which makes the way scientists in India, scientific institutions in India work, or do they not? If they do, then the question is, how is it that we respond to it? And I agree with you again that we have had a rich tradition of science movements in India, environment movements in India, which would challenge this. And I'm again fully with it. But still, the question remains, how is it that, what are the analytical tools which we can use to talk about this productively? If it is productive to say that there is a standard picture of science, which folks would think of as normal science, then does the contemporary, the challenges in our society today, do they correspond to that standard picture? If it does not, why and in what ways can we think about it? I mean, that is where I come from. So it's in that sense, I find them useful. Give me some other label, I'll use it. Sure. Yeah. And the second question, the last part of the question, if you could please repeat it because it's different from this. So last
forgotten that. So maybe we'll go to another question, and I think we have a minute or two to wrap up. So maybe a last question. I'm not sure I fully understand this one, but I'll still read it out. This is from Shyam. Are we leaning too much on citizen science movement to solve all the problems? I think we, everyone, put their 20%, then only we can achieve desirable goal. I'm not sure if I understand the second part of the question, but I think the first part is pretty clear and maybe very relevant in the context that we are a citizen science conference. Are we leaning too much on citizen science to solve all our problems?
There is definitely a problem. I'm sorry, I did not hear the name, but the questioner, Shyam, right? Did you say Shyam?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you, Shyam. I mean, there's definitely a point there. I mean, this comes across in the literature as well very clearly, that citizen science as a burgeoning practice is also, and this is the word from the literature, it's not mine, also in some ways shows how the establishment is withdrawing from knowledge making. The responsibility of the state in some ways is withdrawing from knowledge making, and those knowledges which are for public purpose of a certain kind finally ends up getting done by citizens. When scientific establishments should be getting more funding to think about long-term ecological research, that responsibility should not solely fall on the shoulders of the citizen. I agree till that much. But yet, this is also a radical opportunity for citizens to transform science in particular ways that they would think is desirable. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we will have to wrap up. There are a couple of there are good questions coming up. So they will be there on Slack, Naveen, and we request you to kind of go there and check them out. I will just read them out so that the entire all joining in are able to get the different perspectives, and then please do visit the relevant question for Naveen to respond.
So I will reply in Slack, but you have to give me 2-3 hours because there is something else I have to do. But definitely, Nandini, I will be answering it, and I'm going to write it down. Thank you.
Yeah. I will just read these out because these are all interesting points, and if not answers, at least will get us thinking. Nandini says, you talked about elections affecting science, a great point, and sadly, something that we can see globally today. Do you think that people-driven efforts like citizen science can act as a countermeasure to the decline of science in a non-supportive regime? I might just add, I think the point might be a larger one of it need not necessarily being elections and politics affecting science in a negative kind of way. I think that there's a larger point there. From Paul, this is more specific. I didn't understand the link between organic chemistry and organic farming because all forms of farming, including conventional farming, involve organic chemistry. The organic farming movement is about attempts at more eco-friendly farming. From Prabhakar.
Can I quickly answer that? Paul, thank you. I'm sorry, I was talking in cryptic sense. All that I wanted to mention was that there are different kinds of chemistry which emerged historically. Yeah, so green chemistry in 50s and 70s, between 50s and 70s, the emergence of this has a particular context which is non-scientific in its origin. I did not conflate organic chemistry with organic agriculture. So I think maybe I made that communication. I'm just talking fast. Sorry, back to Prabhakar. Yes.
Okay, so we are completely out of time. So we will just leave it because the next session starts in like a minute, Naveen. Naveen, thank you very much. We have to log off. I think it's been very, very fascinating. Again, I'm just repeating myself. Thanks a lot.
Sure.
Available for on Slack and otherwise. We will share his email ID without his permission if required. And I thank you again very much and hope to be continuing with these discussions. Like many things, this might be the start of many things that can follow.
Thank you very much.
Thank everybody who's joined in. And yes, we can quickly